Welcome into CyHawk Talk. It's an emergency podcast episode as there's some big news in the state of Iowa. That is right. Rocco Becht intends to enter the transfer portal after 3 years at Iowa State, 4 years at Iowa State, 3 years as the starter. And here to break it all down, Ben Hutchins to lend his initial first, reaction to the news.
Yeah, it was not entirely unexpected. I think as soon as Matt Campbell left for Penn State, this was immediately where Cyclone fans' heads went. Is, oh no, the 3-year starter, the guy who's won 26 games, might be gone. Rocco has 1 year left. And just like I said about Matt Campbell, nobody can say Rocco Becht wasn't loyal to Iowa State. I mean, we saw this guy put his body on the line, especially this season. We know he turned down offers from other Power Four programs after last season when he led the Cyclones to its winningest program, record ever. So nobody can say Rocco Becht wasn't loyal. A lot of guys, they leave after 1 year and kind of tarnish their legacy. I think Rocco Becht will always be welcome at Jack Trice Stadium.
Leaves a nice letter to Cyclone Nation on his social media feeds. Says, these past few weeks have brought a lot of emotion and reflection for me and my family. When I committed here in 2022, I couldn't have imagined the magnitude of the journey ahead, the battles we fought, the adversity we pushed through, and the pride I felt every time I put on that Iowa State jersey. This program, this community, and this fan base have shaped me in ways I'll carry for the rest of my life. I have had meaningful conversations with Coach Jimmy Rogers, and I'm confident he will elevate this program to new heights. But after deep consideration, it's always that but, right? After deep consideration, I've decided to pursue new opportunities for my senior season. This decision was not taken lightly. It comes from a place of growth, purpose, and belief in where my path is leading. You embraced me, supported me, and pushed me to become better, not only as a player, but as a man. Iowa State will forever be a part of who I am. Thank you for every moment, every cheer, and every ounce of belief you poured into me. I'll always represent Cyclone Nation with pride. Much love, Rocco Becht. What did you think of the letter?
I thought there were a few revealing tidbits in there, most namely that he's had meaningful conversations with Jimmy Rogers. And I'm going to take Rocco Beck's word at that. I do think he probably listened to the sales pitch and gave Rogers some reasons for him to stay. I mean, we saw him at the CyHawk women's basketball game. I don't think this was a case where the second Matt Campbell leaves, Rocco Becht has his mind made up and he's ready to go out there and leave with him. I think he weighed his loyalty to Iowa State University alongside the coaching staff. And I do think when Rocco talks about he, has a purpose and he has a direction that he wants to go, I think he's talking about the NFL there. And I think Rocco probably views his best chance at getting to the NFL as sticking with Taylor Mauser, the offensive coordinator, sticking with his head coach, sticking with his quarterbacks coach. I mean, there are a lot of reasons for Rocco Becht to go and play on the biggest stage, perhaps at Penn State, perhaps somewhere else. Rocco told us in his letter that, or Pete Thamel reported that Rocco is going to weigh all other options. So I don't think it's maybe just Penn State that he's interested in, and certainly going to get calls from other places as well.
Yeah, I think most programs in the country would be foolish not to have at least some interest in Rocco Becht. I think that he's an exceptional quarterback, as I've stated on the show a number of times.
You were
Two
first on
notes.
it. You were the first to identify it.
I don't think so. I think that Iowa State coach Campbell maybe and Nathan Shielhaas might have been the first ones to identify that in the wake of the Hunter Decker's gambling probe situation. But I was certainly an early believer on the Rocco train. Two notes from me. This is kind of a tough situation for Coach Rogers in that last year he takes the Washington State job. John Mateer transfers and goes to Oklahoma, leads them to the college football playoff. Had a great season at Wazoo the year before. And then he gets to Iowa State and Rocco leaves within 2 weeks. I don't know what the timeline was at Wazoo. I don't know if Mateer was already in the transfer portal by the time Rogers got there, but just absolutely brutal situations when you look at his two P5 jobs. I guess we want to consider the Pac-12 still a P5. But if we look at the two big jobs he's gotten, both quarterbacks that have would have made that landing spot a lot cushier, a lot nicer, a lot more attractive coming in. That 10 years ago, those guys would have stayed probably because the transfer rules would have forced them to sit out a year. He loses them and has to go find a quarterback, and sometimes getting the right quarterback is what you really need as a coach to kind of get the program moving. I can think about Coach Campbell's time at Iowa State. Once he got Brock Purdy, that kind of turbocharged the expectations for that program, and then to follow it up with a Rocco Becht after that 1 year with Hunter Deckers, just kind of kept things going at a really high level, clicking at a really high level. And then number two, you mentioned every team in the country should have interest. I already jokingly put the jersey swap out there of Rocco wearing the Hawkeye uniform. Um, but let's interact with the punchline of that joke seriously for a moment. Would that be the heel turn of all heel turns? Would that tarnish his legacy if he were to become a Hawkeye? And does that essentially rule out transferring to Iowa?
I don't think he's going to Iowa. I mean, come on. Like there's no way. I do think Rocco Becht has a lot of love for Iowa State University. And I think that yields some amount of, you know, unlove for Iowa. We saw him at the
Disdain.
women's basketball game. I just don't think that would be the case. And you know, I think you look at Iowa State's offensive situation in 2026, and it's cloudy. Jimmy Rogers is a defensive guy. We don't know who's staying. Most of the offensive coaches are all changed over. Like it's a cloudy situation there. I think it's another cloudy situation at Iowa. Nothing about this offense really impressed me. Not exactly a place where quarterbacks go to take that launching point to the NFL draft, which is maybe I think what Rocco Becht is thinking. This guy has 1 year left. Um, what's he gonna do with it? And I think that's where his mind is at. So I think that's probably out of the equation. I think there's a little bit of a loyalty angle in there, but it was a great jersey swap. I don't know if it was you or Chat
It was
GPT, but
Chat
it looked really
GPT. It
good.
was Chat
It looked really
GPT.
good. He wouldn't even have to change the yellow out of his closet. Gold.
I
Sorry, Cyclone fans.
certainly, and it's interesting because something I talked about when Iowa State was on its 5 game losing streak was, does this prevent Rocco from jumping to the NFL after this season? And at this point, you have to think that if he doesn't have those nagging injuries, doesn't have that dip in October, maybe we're just talking he's going straight to the NFL at this point
Yeah.
because it's now at this point in the season, 3 months ago, it looked like this was going to be a good quarterback draft class, and now it's looking like this one might not be as good as people thought. Next year's might be super good. So he could have jumped in and been, maybe a little bit higher on teams' draft boards in terms of the quarterback position than maybe next year's class, which is looking elite. But enough talk about Rocco and the people that are no longer with the program. What can you tell us about the guys that are still with the Cyclones at this point? In Alex Manske and Connor Moberly. What do those two bring to the table?
Those are the two names that Cyclone fans will immediately go to and think of as, okay, who's left in that quarterback room? There are some other names, but these are the two guys who have played and you feel like have a chance to be, right now the leaders in the clubhouse as the quarterback for next season. And I think it starts with Alex Manske. He's a freshman, true freshman this year, played in 3 games against South Dakota, Cincinnati, and TCU. So he has, I think, that redshirt year, which is great. You want to redshirt that guy and keep his eligibility as long as possible. And Manske was a 3-star recruit by most accounts, a 4-star recruit by some other accounts, and had offers from Iowa, K-State, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Shows you kind of the caliber of quarterback this guy is. He spent his offseason recovering from a torn UCL. So it was kind of a surprise when we saw him inserted in that South Dakota game. But Cyclone fans, if you remember, Manske was awesome. He led 3 touchdown drives. And he looked so physical. He lowered his shoulder at the goal line and powered through for a touchdown. And you really thought, man, this guy brings kind of another dimension. He was also 4 of 5 in that game passing. So you got to see him throw with that torn UCL, which is definitely, I think, both of those, the physicality and him throwing, offer indications that he's, moving into the healthy component. And in that same vein, we saw Manske play because Connor Moberly, who was the backup pretty much the entire season in 2024, he was injured a little bit. He had like a harness on one of his shoulders, so he was not able to play. Moberly played in a few games this season. They both did. They both came in limited packages as runners. I think that was kind of intended to give Rocco Becht a little bit of a break. We saw Rocco was so beat up all season long, but Rocco didn't miss any starts. That's maybe perhaps Rocco Becht's legacy is as an Iron Man. He was always available. So we really haven't seen extended action for either of these two guys, Moberly or Manske. Moberly's the kid from South Polk, the local guy. Um, but I think I'd give Manske the edge if I was, you know, handicapping this quarterback jockey race for 2026.
I think we also have to acknowledge that Iowa State would be equally as foolish not to explore their options in the transfer portal. JJ Cole back in, maybe there could be a reunion there. He's in the portal after some time at Appalachian State. Um, but I guess what I wanted to ask is we know that they're changing up their scheme defensively and the kind of players that they're going to need to fill out that roster. Said they had too many defensive backs. I remember you mentioning. Do you know if they're going to be changing, tinkering with a bunch of stuff on the offensive end that maybe Moberly and Manske don't fit what they want to do offensively, or are those guys potentially fits in that offense?
The buzz around Iowa State's offense next season is it's moving to a pro style system. And you think that comes in from Tyler Roll, the former tight ends coach with the Detroit Lions this year, who had spent time on staff. He's coming in as the offensive coordinator. And by all accounts, from what I've been told and heard, he's bringing in a pro style system. Expect to see a lot of Carson Hansen. Expect to see a lot of running the ball. You hope Hansen stays. If not, maybe a Busama or another back. I think it's going to be a more ground control system, perhaps more under center, kind of one of those offensive schemes that complements a really solid defense. So I do think it's going to be a little bit of a different offensive environment for Iowa State, compared to Rocco Becht, who is fully capable of throwing the ball 50 times a game and going out and spreading the offense out and winning you a game like that.
Man, they should go get Dylan Raiola to run the pro style offense. Uh,
You're
you
full of
got
ideas today.
you got any parting thoughts before we go ahead and wrap up this emergency edition of CyHawk Talk?
I think we have to talk about Iowa State's 2026 recruiting class. Right now, there's not a freshman quarterback in line, the next guy, if you will. Iowa State lost both of its quarterbacks who were at one point committed in 2026. You'll remember Jet Tamala, the now Bama quarterback. He was, one of the highest rated recruits in program history and from Omaha. Man, he had a lot of excitement around him, but he flipped on Matt Campbell. And then after, that happened, Iowa State went out and got Case Evans, a quarterback from Texas. That was all well and good until Matt Campbell left. And now Case Evans is committed to Penn State. So right now in Iowa State's 2026 recruiting class, there are no quarterbacks in it. I would expect Jimmy Rogers. I don't know who's left in that class, quite frankly, but you'd think they'd like to have at least one guy in that class. And I think you're right. They have to look at the portal. If you lose to the portal, you might have to take from the portal, and quarterback is always a position to watch there. So maybe those two guys right now, Manske and Moberly, at this point, we're so late in all these cycles that those might be the two best options Iowa State gets.
Tyler Roll doesn't exactly have the worst resume when it comes to quarterbacks. He helped develop Trey Lance at North Dakota State. He was there when Carson Wentz was there, Easton Stick. All three of those guys ended up in the NFL. I can't remember who the most recent North Dakota State quarterback he would have had his fingerprints on was. That individual's name is escaping me at the moment, but the Bison, not exactly not the opposite of a quarterback factory. They have a better recent history than the Hawkeyes do. So he could he could potentially throw his resume around and woo a bigger name in the transfer portal than maybe you would expect given what we know about Iowa State's financial situation and what they're able to throw around at different players. So I think there's reason to be optimistic about what that next quarterback could look like in Ames.
And yeah, one last note on that. Maybe an unheralded piece about all of this is Rocco Beck took team-friendly deals to remain in Ames. He was so comfortable in this environment. He wrote in that letter how much he enjoyed, being in the community, and you saw the camps he ran, and Brent Bloom, I think he's talked about too. Rocco Becht is not, going after every last penny from Iowa State, which worked so well with everything we know about, where Iowa State's at in this whole crazy world of college football. So that could be a component that's kind of not talked about as much, but was super important to building out the rest of the roster and tells you a little bit about Rocco Becht as the guy. Again, I don't think this is a case of disloyalty. For Rocco Becht to leave, why not open up all your options, try and make your one last year in college football count as everything it can to go get you to the NFL, whether that's staying with the continuity of your offensive staff at Penn State or going elsewhere. I don't necessarily blame him.
In the wise words of Jake Brend, remember there's going to be a lot more bad news before there's good news. Iowa State fans, the sky is not falling. Rocco Becht was a big domino to fall, but there will be better days ahead, and there's plenty of quarterbacks in the transfer portal and two exciting options on the roster already. Thanks for listening to this emergency edition of CyHawk Talk. We'll be back after the holiday because Ben has just informed me he did not take his microphone with him home for the holidays, and I'm not going to do a podcast with a man without a microphone after this one. Thanks for watching.